Last week, we talked a lot about the sources of theology, that is, where we get the meat to do theology with, the places we find stuff to think about God. And we talked about Scripture and Revelation and the tradition of the church over time, and the culture in which we live, and how we find God in that, or how we find God as opposed to the culture in which we live. Our own experience, and the experience of groups of people, and reason, bringing our own thought and careful thought and scientific thought and all of that to our experiences of God. And so all of those are sources for theology. So, and different Christian denominations value them in different ways, but those are the basic sources. Today, we're going to talk about, and we may not get through them all, the divisions of theology. There are several divisions, all of which make up the system in systematic theology. When we talk about systematic theology, we're talking about theology that looks at a particular issue through each of these systems, okay, through each of these divisions, and tries to address the same question through them all. And that doesn't make any sense right now, but it may when I do the next about 4 sentences. And then I'll stop and ask you if you have questions, and then we'll look at each one in a little more detail. The divisions are as follows: God, revelation, creation and providence, what's known as theological anthropology, that is how God relates to humanity, sin and evil, Christ and salvation, ecclesiology, that is the church, sacraments, spirit, and eschatology, that is the end times. Those 10 things are the divisions of systematic theology. So if you want to do systematic theology, you have to say something like, what do I believe about God? And then what does that tell you about God? What does that tell you? Believing that about God, what does that tell you about God? Believing that about God, what does that tell you about creation and providence? Believing that about God, what does that tell you about God's relation to humanity? Believing that about God, what does that tell you about sin and evil? So you have to track that piece of what you believe all the way through the system to do systematic theology. And that is the kind of touchstone of Christian theology. It's really easy to say something like, God is love. Okay? That's a theological statement about God. God is love. And to leave it at that. But to really engage in the discussion and the study of God, you have to say, so what if God is love, why is there evil? If God is love, what should the church look like? If God is love, how does salvation work? Those are the deeper questions. And then once you've worked through them, you can say, okay, knowing that God is love, I know these things. Then the next piece, which is even more fun, is now that I've worked out the system for God is love, God is also just. And so if God is just, what does that mean for sin and evil? Whoops, okay, now I've said something different here than I did when I did sin and evil for God is love. Well, how do I make those two things coexist? Have I lost you yet? No? Yes? Sort of? Okay. Let me take a minute and break down each of these and kind of ask you the basic fundamental questions about each of them. And we can talk about them a little bit. So let's start with God. The basic fundamental questions about God are, who is God? What is the nature of God? And how can we or how can't we know God? So let's start with the easy one. Who is God? Just throw out phrases you've heard or things that you know or...
Wisdom.
Okay. God is wisdom. That's good. What else? Creator. Mm-hmm. In the Nicene Creed, we say Father Almighty, so all-powerful. Love I've already used. All-knowing, all-seeing, all-powerful. These are all things we say about God. And we've now moved into things about the nature of God. Those things, all-knowing, all-powerful, loving, all of those things are also comments about the nature of God, about who God is in and of himself. And then how can we know God, or how can't we know God? How do we experience God?
Well, you can't see him.
Right.
Because in the Bible, like, you die if you saw him.
Right.
Know thyself.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times we experience God in our inner thoughts. Some people hear God over time, or have heard God in the past. Not me personally, but that happens for some people.
Is that a conscience?
It could be. That could be a way that people hear God. A lot of people talk about hearing God through other people, that they experience the presence of God through other people. Okay, so that's kind of God. Those are the basic questions about God. Revelation is about how God makes himself known. So through scriptures, through prophets, through the church, maybe. How does God make himself known is the basic question about Revelation. Creation and providence then asks, what is creation? What does it mean that the world is created? What is or was the role of God in creation? And how does God continue to interact with creation? And this is where we have all kinds of fights in the Christian church. And you have people all the way along the spectrum. And in the Episcopal Church, we have people all the way along the spectrum in the Episcopal Church. People often will say to me, what does the Episcopal Church believe about evolution? Like, that's not the right question. The right question is, what do Episcopalians believe about evolution? And the answer is, we have some who believe that the world was created in 7 24-hour days. And we have some who believe that God set off the Big Bang and that it's pretty much evolved from there, and everything in between. Well, who's right? All of them. Yeah. That's the great gift of our church, and the great problem of our church is that it's okay that you believe all those things. But it's okay that you believe all those things. And so we have to figure out how to live together. So, but that's creation. So again, let's go back to our God is love. If God is love, what is creation?